Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining today's virtual conference. My name is Nehal Khosla, and I'm your host for today. Dun& Bradstreet India and SAP Concur, in association with UiPath, KGISL, and Numbers, are glad to present this virtual conference on the pertinent topic, the future of finance, new age technology, or new skills. Now let's take a quick look at the flow of today's session. Please refer the agenda on your screens. Our speakers for the day are Ms. Mankaran Chauhan, Mr. Vel Kanyappan, Mr. Sriram Narayan, Mr. Bhaskar Ganpati, Mr. Vivek Sharma, Mr. Ganesh K, Mr. Swayam Saurabh, Mr. Jayesh Sangrachka, Ms. Sumedha Verma, and Mr. Samir Madan. A promising agenda with an eminent lineup of speakers, isn't it? Well, I would like to take this opportunity to welcome and thank everyone for being a part of this virtual conference today. With this, let's kickstart with the opening speaker of the day. I would now like to invite Ms. Mankaran Chauhan, Managing Director, Indian Subcontinent, SAP Concur, to share her views with us. Welcome, Ms. Chauhan.
Thank you, Nehal. Very much appreciate the opportunity to be here with everybody. Nehal, would you pull my slides up?
Definitely. We've shared the presentation rights with you. Just a moment. Yeah, we're just sharing it with you. Just a minute.
You'll pull the slides up on the WebEx itself, please.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Thank you. All right. So while we wait for the slides to come in a very interesting topic of the future of finance and the new age technology or new skills. As we all explore new business models and the ways of working, encouraged very mildly put by the current pandemic, there's a lot of thought process that needs to now be given to the future of finance in this new normal. The current focus is for finance is very largely on scenario planning and budget process improvements. Neil, are you able to pull my slides, please?
Yes, yes. Just a minute. It was up. I think there was a technical glitch. I'm so sorry.
No worries.
They're just putting it up.
I'll give you a minute.
They're just putting it up. Yeah, it is up here now. You can see, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Over to you. Thank you.
As I was saying, the current focus for finance is very much on scenario planning and budget process improvements. However, we are seeing that CFOs are going to take on a significant role in the transformation of finance, the transformation of businesses itself. It will be finance functions itself will become not just a key designer and owner of this new normal, but it will also help increase its reach into the business individual. If you look at finance's primary role will shift to becoming supporting the business model transformation, merger acquisition, and other large capital investment decisions. On the front end, finance will be seen as a strategic partner, modeling the changes and helping find the optimal scenario. Whereas on the back end, finance will be specialized in rapid execution, reporting methodologies to ensure the execution of the business plan. This need for proactiveness becomes really pronounced with this constant disruption that we are currently seeing. Example, if you look at situations like COVID, they really have changed the profile of spending within the organizations. As an example, we now see a substantial move towards virtual teams, and therefore spend on communications or virtual office is shifting. In the future as well, there will also be likely lesser fixed cost and more variable type of cost that finance is now gearing up to. Some of the CFOs that we've been engaged with are also telling us that they are becoming more and more comfortable with new processes and working virtually. They're in fact trying to find out their dependencies, what more needs to be improved, how can they leverage the current situation and turn it into an opportunity to make more permanent improvements where appropriate. No longer can the entire month or a week be spent on planning and budget cycles. There is a need for a more dynamic, real-time visibility to spends and the need to be able to plan and respond to budget reallocation in a more real-time basis. So with operations largely automated, finance will now double down on business insight and service. The skills required by finance professionals will change. likely very dramatically as new combinations of technology and human workforce permeates the workplace. So with that context, I'd love to talk a little bit more. If you could move to the next slide, please. We now, now before than ever, I think we are faced with this unprecedented time, and this is an opportunity, therefore, for us to take a step back, review the policies we have, and adjust the position to what will be a very changed future. Right? We've all been discussing about the pre-COVID and the post-COVID, and how life will change, in that post-COVID era. And what we do today will set the groundwork for the new world to come. Let me explain this by breaking it down into three gears. What needs to be done now, that is on a more immediate basis, what needs to be prepared in the short term, and then finally what will be done in the, for us to be propelled into the future with like a full gun blazing, full engines blazing. Let's talk about gear one. Gear one is about creating the efficiencies and defining the new normal. As employees adapt to the new normal, we will need to create efficiencies by automating capture, processing of expenses, invoices, etc. That will significantly improve employee productivity, especially in a time where every minute is important. If you look at data and analytics, will be very critical, both predictive and cognitive. We now need information for decision making to be available in a real-time basis, leading to the prevalence of the self-service model. Data is going to be at the fingertips of decision makers, enabling business to make timely decisions as intelligence becomes nearly in time through the connected processes that we now have in our organizations. No intermediaries needed for budget queries, report production. Business partnering will shift upstream from budget and reporting to include scenario planning, advanced forecasting, better visualization. And teams of business partners are now coming together to focus on more complex commercial decisions, moving around the business as needed, and therefore information is required to make decisions just in time, fully integrated with the overall management process. Let me give you an example that a customer in fact shared last week with us. Some of their the employees now needed to set up a home office. They now need to set in controls in place for the new policy. So our customer had to very quickly develop a policy, deploy it to a very large user base, and manage that spend from a huge variety of suppliers. They also wanted to have a daily view of what the data is to drive the company-wide communication and ensure that the budget was, of course, aligned and not spent. So they really needed to redefine the acceptable types of spends, leverage spend management solutions like Concur to track and manage them in more real time. So what we will see in this, in this year is really the technology to be used as a lever and partner to get this done. It will help you move from contactless support in ensuring constant visibility of information in the finance function. Let's go to the gear two, which is really about setting up for change, which is a lot of organizations are in this gear two today already. Progressive finance teams have a strategy now to redesign and automate the entire FP&A process, to shift their focus from transactional to strategic. Accountants that were using spreadsheets are likely to be replaced by technology that does 90% of the work without human intervention. Higher value work requires cross-functional collaboration amongst business people, technology teams, finance strategists, etc. And companies that want to thrive in the brave new world will now need to cultivate these skills that are necessary for the self-service culture. Adaptive technologies will drastically change work that finance has done through the use of smart algorithms that can now be leveraged to activities and tasks. Let's take an example of robotics and machine learning. Robotics will take more back office operations in areas like accounts payable or accounts receivable. In fact, we are expecting that in the next 5 years, many transactions will be held without any intervention, streamline the workflow management, such as expense approvals, invoices, reimbursements, etc. In fact, nearly 60% of companies expect that RPA processes will have a significant impact on their FP&A process even in the next 2 years. And RPA will drive that extreme automation with rule-based finance processes, resulting in greater capacity for finance to take on more value-added activities. And with that, let's shift to the final gear, the top gear that we are all interested in getting back to business and really getting future state ready. Agility will therefore become a very prized quality as finance organizations have to deliver differentiated service levels to different parts of businesses. For high-performing units, a finance business partner might need to co-locate, join the business leadership team. Combinations of people and technology will be the glue that keeps teams connected. And it's therefore going to be critical for finance teams to be reskilled so they can focus on strategic decision making that now allows to drive revenue or cost optimization. It's also going to be about empowering them so they can focus on enhanced cost and profitability reporting, rolling forecast, zero-based budgeting that we are constantly now having a conversation with. So the shift will go from preparation of data to being more proactive and insightful about it. As an example, rather than say, what does this data tell me about the business, conversations will shift to how we can close the gaps in performance versus expectation using levers like supplier management or introducing new controls and spend in the business. The role of technology there is to really make it, make it easier, simple for businesses to do. Let me give you an example of, just as having processes as an example of the mobile technology to take pictures of receipts or, for allowing for your employees to complete an expense process completely remotely with the use of technology, not just simplifies the life for the employees, allowing them to spend time on what matters most, but also for your approvers as well as for finance to track expenditures and having, have the real-time visibility that I just mentioned before. And of course, if you couple that with next generation cloud computing and the explosion of connected devices, and we are going to see a more real-time user interface driven by that. And proven cloud applications will make it much easier and simpler to embrace projects, and thus giving finance the ability to select those applications that gives them the real-time data and enable them to be a business partner for the business. Next slide, please. I spent a large portion of my career at Gartner, so I think it's only fair that I talk about the Gartner study for finance. And if you look through this, and the sources mentioned below, but if you look at if you look through April, cash was what the senior finance leaders were all talking about. That was the biggest business concern that they were talking through. But in fact, through May now, 88% of the finance leaders are now prioritizing different concerns. Most have decided how they'll protect their assets, cash flows, and give them the breathing room to shift from addressing immediate problems to positioning their companies for the rest of 2020. If you look at how we're seeing the change in the company cost structure in response to COVID-19, which costs to preserve, which ones to remove, which ones to reintroduce, etc. CFOs are now trying to guide the business in applying 3 principles to cost structure evaluation. Number 1 is really delaying the non-essential capital investments to protect strategic cost. What I mean by that is that companies are now looking to evaluate the portfolio and identify what should be considered for divestment, where should costs be shifted or saved from delaying the non-essential spending, or where should funding continue to maintain the capital investments or reduce or delay the incremental capital investments that are needed in the business. The second point would be around determining which costs don't need to return. Example would be finance partnering with real estate leaders to determine how to use remote work to reduce the company's footprint, evaluate the cost impact of new distribution models, or pressure test what T&E spend is even really necessary as we come back to this post-COVID era. And finally, the number 3 would be really bringing back labor costs before other costs. So if you look at the study that Gartner has done, nearly 50% of the senior finance leaders are planning to begin hiring before they begin other costs. And after hiring, the CFOs are more likely to bring back the travel and expense and CapEx investments would be the 2 next big areas that investments would start coming back as we see in the post-COVID area. So next slide, please. In closing, I know you've got a really interesting conversation going forward, and I'm looking forward to listening to the rest of the speakers. So in closing, I fundamentally believe that this is a crisis. Like every crisis, there is an opportunity that can come out of it. There's this quote that says, not all storms come to disrupt, some of them come to clear the path. And these unprecedented times have definitely cleared the path and presented us with that opportunity to relook at our business models, opportunity to look at the way of working and create a new normal that is going to be future ready. So with that, thank you very much for having me, and back to you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Chauhan. A very informative and a very interactive session. With this, I would like to now invite our second speaker for the day, Mr. Well Kenyappan. He's the VP Global Finance and Operations at UiPath. I would request Mr. Kenyappan to please share his views with us. Uh, we'll have a short brief of him that so that you can read about him. That's Mr. Kanyappan for you. He's the VP Global Finance and Operations at UiPath. Welcome, Mr. Kanyappan.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me here. So this is Vail. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we're able to hear you.
So I guess you're able to see my screen. So thanks for having me here. Very warm welcome. I'm glad that I'm given an opportunity to talk to all of you. So let me start with what happened in the recent past, right? So who could have predicted beginning of the year or even beginning of February that we would be in this kind of situation? And having said that, I also see a big opportunity in what we are in. Right, so look at how the Nasdaq behaved during the last 2 to 3 months. On February 19th, we touched an all-time high of 9,800 points in Nasdaq. Right, so just let's look at Nasdaq, not the NYSE or the BSE for the time being, and it scaled down to 6,860 points, which is 30% drop from the peak, the all-time high. And yesterday, we are almost there in terms of doing an all-time high. So within a period of like 1.5 months, it again jumped 30%, right? So if we are a very conservative CFO, we may be crumbling and then seeing what we need to do. And look at those who took this as an opportunity. So the smart people who actually use this time in a much better way would have made a lot of money. So there are people who invested in this time. There are people who have invested in acquiring companies, forming strategic relationship with their partners, or acquiring companies abroad. So that's why these kind of testing times also pose a big opportunities for people. And time again, even in 2008, when we went through the big meltdown, there are a lot of people who made money. Like if you look at what the big investors would have done, like Warren Buffett, he invested in GE, which gave him a big return. There are people who invested in General Motors, which gave them a huge return. So these are definitely testing times, but that's when the CFO steps in and then looks at what's in the future and then try to make the right investments in terms of adversities, right? As people say, when people are greedy, you should be on the other side. And then when people are having fear, you should be on the other side, right? So that's what it really shows us. And that's where the real value of a CFO comes in. So with that, I would like to just move to the next slide. And I want to just talk about what a role of a CFO, right? So I draw this analogy whenever I talk to people about a role of a CFO. It's like you are driving a car. You may assume that your CEO is the driver and you are more of a navigator. And there are companies where the CFOs are well, I would say, authorized to take decisions and they are empowered. You can consider the CFO as a driver. When you're driving on a road, like let's take a typical Indian road, may not be of any other foreign country, we have a lot of potholes. So the potholes are the short-term goals which you have, which you need to clear for you to go to the next level, right? Then comes your intersections. So the intersections are your midterm goals, like meeting your goals for the quarter, closing your books on time, right? And can you just get money from the bank to meet your short-term goals, or kind of looking at any partnerships? And your long-term goals are your end goals, where you look at your final destination of how do you add value to your shareholders. So at a high level, what is the value a CFO creates to the company as well as to the stakeholders? Is like take the company beyond what others would think, right? So do the right investments at the right time, control wherever there is need to be a control, and then concentrate and then take the company in the right direction. So that's exactly what the CFO does at a high level. So I generally draw this analogy as to like how a CFO should drive. You consider yourself as a navigator or a driver and take the company in the right direction with the right speed and with the right brakes whenever there is a need. And how do we create stakeholder value, right? So as I said, we are the champion of the stakeholders. When I say stakeholders, it could be shareholders, or vendors, employees, our customers, right? the biggest value which we bring in is to make right investments at the right time in innovating and making strong execution. So when I say innovation, it's not that we are going to be product managers or like innovating something on the company's sales side. We have to ensure that we allocate the right money for the sales or the marketing or the R&D or any other investments which we make, be it your strategic investment or acquiring companies. Make the right investment and making it innovative, right? Which others don't even see at that point of time. It may look a stupid decision, but you're seeing beyond your short term, and that's when you're able to make the right decisions, right? Then it's a sustainable growth. In this kind of situations, I think the biggest driver for the CFOs is like, how do I maintain my existing customer base? Forget about acquiring new customers, because acquiring new customers will involve a bit more investment and it's a long chain. So the first and foremost goal for any CFO as of now is to ensure that we retain our existing customers, and is there a way we can upsell? Forget about losing any of our customers. So first thing is like we should just retain them, right? Then invest something more and ensure that we get new customers so that like we are able to have a sustainable growth. So I see the CFOs more of enablers as a second step. Then comes the profitability. So how do you ensure that we get good profitability in the long term as well as in the short term, right? We do analysis of our portfolio, take a stock of everything that we invested in, looking at whether we are invested in people, whether we are invested in industries, whether we are investing in plant and machinery, or we are investing in new technologies, right? So do an analysis of your portfolio and look at whether we should reallocate it based on the current situation, or what would happen in 6 months' time. So I personally feel that, okay, we would probably forget COVID, and any investment you make now and then you make in the right direction would earn multifold return in the future. So the CFO's role is to look at the current allocations, do what is the right allocation, and then like take steps in securing funding or whatever we need for us to execute that. Right? Last but not the least is more on the execution side, do things better, cheaper, and faster. And that's where, as Mankiran mentioned, a lot of this technology is coming in, and that's where you have the RPAs and then other new age technologies coming in, right? Last but not the least is like, how do we secure good capital for us to sustain our business and then reallocate them wisely? At a high level, I think many of the CFOs, as you know, would have an accounting background. Not all of them. There are many of them who are engineers or in MBAs, but like there is a fair share of people who are accountants, and they generally come out with a controllership mindset because they probably would have started their career somewhere in accounting, then would have become a controller, then probably become a CFO. And there are many of them who actually moved on to become the CEOs because they saw much beyond what an accountant or a CEO, CFO would see. And that's why they make a big difference. In the process, what happens is like we put a lot of brakes, right, as a CFO. Generally, people say, okay, the CFOs are being counters, they know to add value. They kind of try to stop things and they're not trying to allow me to be innovative, right? And look at this analogy of driving a car. Why do we have a brake? The brake is not to stop you or probably help you from not meeting an accident. The brakes actually help you to drive faster. When you're driving a car, what do? You apply brakes when you're taking turns, and then you use the accelerator when there's nothing in front of you, right? So the brakes are required. When I say brakes, the brakes are the controls or compliances. Like for instance, you are getting a tax notice, or like you are meeting your close deadlines, closing your books faster, or replying to a tax notice. And this may look very tactical, assuming that you have taken care of all your basics. Like if you look at the Maslow's theory, if your basics are taken care, it allows you to go beyond your basics and then think beyond. And let's assume you, even as a person, on the personal side, if you have your investments taken care, where your basics are covered, it allows you to take risk, because with risk comes reward, right? So that's the reason why I would like to say you have to take care of your basics. If compliances are taken care, you can freely go and innovate and invest in the right places and have the power to take those risks, which will give multifold returns, right? So that's the reason why I say compliances are very important, and the new age technologies, as Mankiran also touched upon, would help you take care of your basics in terms of your closing your books on time, paying your vendors on time, applying cash from your customers, like you are taking care of your inventory, doing a forecast properly, right? And everything done on time. So this gives you 80% of your time. Otherwise, what happens is you end up spending most of your time on the basics, which doesn't allow you to think beyond, because you're proud of closing your books on time. You're proud to say that, okay, my forecast variance was just 2%, 3%, and nothing gets out of this because it's just that your personal pride is satisfied for doing something which really doesn't add value to the company, right? For us to go beyond the basics, like what is it we need to do? We need to play the game of risk control. And as I said, if you don't take the risk and you don't get a reward as well, like in this kind of testing times, I'm sure there are many companies who went beyond their needs. They borrowed money. A lot of them have raised money even during this time. Probably the valuations were lesser, but they wanted to raise money to invest in the right companies because there are a lot of companies out there who are available very cheaper, right? So you need to make the first mover advantage. You need to make acquisitions. You need to build strategic partnerships. And is there any way we can build both, like being compliant and also being aggressive? Yes, it is possible if you take care of your basics ready, right? And as Manikaran touched upon at a high level, I want to just quickly go through what are the big drivers for the CFOs as of now. Ensure that we preserve cash and see how fast we can actually get additional cash or acquire more customers so that we can stretch the existing cash for a much longer time. So this may not apply to the bigger companies who are sitting on billions of dollars of cash. I'm talking about the mid-size or the Indian startups kind of setup. They are all thinly stretched in terms of cash because most of them are sitting on like 6 months or 12 months of run rate, right? At the same time, you also need to bring down your cost base. It could be in terms of realigning your workforce, like letting go of resources which are not required, or realign them into a different department or some other divisions. Improve the productivity, and I'll touch upon that towards the end of this presentation as to how we can improve productivity or doing more with less. The next one comes is retaining your customer, as I said. The next one is definitely the planning scenario because like there are companies who are literally have no sales in this last 3 months because of COVID. So you need to do a lot of scenario planning. What would happen if my sales drop down by 10%? What would happen if it goes down by 30%? What if, and at the same time, there are also companies which had a huge increase in their sales, particularly the technology companies or the edutech companies, which saw a multifold increase in their business. And you need to look at multiple scenario planning. Your couple of planning scenarios won't help because your CEO might come and ask you, saying, okay, tell me what if I drop my sales by 10%? What if I drop my sales force by 10%, right? So you need to be ready and you need to be agile. And there are good technology that will help you reach there, right? Then the most important thing which people probably to some extent have not paid attention from my assessment is on the communication with the stakeholders, right? I think in this kind of situations, more communication is better than no communication. At the same time, you shouldn't be saying something which you should not be saying because it could touch the personal lives of many of them, and you need to be careful. Last but not the least, retention. In the situations like the way we saw in 2008, you end up losing good employees because when the company is not in a good shape, when employees feel that there is something wrong with the company or it may not sustain or they don't have enough cash, they end up looking for opportunities. And most of the time you end up losing the good employees and not the good ones stay back because they don't get an opportunity or they don't want to leave, right? And how can you achieve this? Like driving sustainable growth, right? What we need to do is like basically take up your lower end processes and try to see whether we could actually digitize. When I say lower end, the transaction processes, meaning your accounts payable, accounts receivable, your GL book closure. It also would include your budgeting and forecasting. It could be even reporting. I think there are a lot of people who spend a lot of time in sending out reports to like multiple stakeholders. And there are easy ways of digitizing this and sending multiple reports to multiple people at the same time without adding additional headcount. Minimize the business risk, timeliness, accuracy, and integrity of reporting. As Manikaran mentioned, robotics, process automation kind of tools would ensure that as long as you configure it in the right way, there is no way you will actually have any errors in your database. So you can definitely be 100% sure that if you did the right thing in closing your books. Last one on the slide is on the innovation. So you need to make the right investment in ensuring that you capture the right data and doing the right analytics and providing the inputs to your management. And I'll go through this very quick. We're running out of time. So your RPA tools or the new age technologies will definitely ensure that you're closing your books on time, capturing the right data and right information to the management. It will help you to do analytics. So my friend next would be talking about a couple of tools on this. So RPA actually brings in a lot of these things together. we're calling it intelligent automation or rapid automation kind of a tools. Like it brings in everything together. It brings in analytics, it brings in AI and ML together, and it also helps you to do less with more. More with less. And build to scale. Right. There are a few tools which I would like to touch upon. One is document processing. So as a finance professional, you also need to build more documentation, either for a US GAAP or Indian GAAP. There are tools called process mapping, which would actually take screenshots of your applications, whatever you're running, and it would actually help you automate those. There are tools called process mining, which will help you to track all your processes, ensure that you have a clear documentation, and it help you to identify what are the processes which you can automate. This is called process mining. We would cover that in the next presentation. Then the last one is the hyper automation. So this is the RPA combining your AI, ML, and analytics put together. To conclude, I would like to just share a bit about the analogy which I started with. Our job as a CFO is to ensure that we drive safer our company in a very right direction and in a very faster way. So that's a need of the hour for the CFOs. And I would like to conclude that and then hand it over to Mr. Sriram Narayanan, who's the Director of Customer Engagement and Intelligent Automation from KGSAL. And thanks for the opportunity. And if there is any question, I would be more than happy to answer during the chat session. Thank you so much for the opportunity again.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kaniyappan. That was a really informative session. With this, I would like to introduce to you all our next speaker for the day. That is Mr. Sriram Narayan, Director, Customer Engagement, Intelligent Automation, KGISL, to share his views with us. Welcome, Mr. Narayan. Mr. Narayan, I think you're on mute. Could you please unmute yourself? Yeah.
Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Vail. Thank you, Mankiran. Glad to be part of this webinar. So briefly, I've been getting an idea of how the CFO's landscape is being reshaped due to various factors, COVID-19 being one of them. And also how the smart use of technology can enable us to deal with the current metamorphosis that is in play. I am here to briefly talk about taking a cue from Mankiran's presentation about the second gear, which is about robotic and AI and ML, and how starting from there on you can actually reach the top gear, and how the CFO's office would actually drive that process for every organization. So with that, I would like to kind of start with a very cliched question, which is, what is RPA, right? I chose to begin with this because though RPA is a very familiar terminology, I would like to talk about how RPA2 has evolved in the last couple of years. RPA, it stands for Robotic Process Automation, refers to automation of business processes which are repetitive and involve they are mundane in nature and they are rule based. They do not have too much of decision making involved, and they basically do not change, or they are not dynamic in nature. So while that was RPA, the other peripheral realms of artificial intelligence, machine learning, native integrations were isolated from the core RPA functional landscape itself. So to give a bit of an example, if you want to do or automate a task of performing a data entry into an ERP system, so the first step would be to kind of extract the data from data source, which would probably be digitized documents, right? So while the data entry task itself would be automated through RPA, the extraction of the data would require a technology such as an OCR or equivalent, which would probably reside outside the purview of RPA. Hence, the limitations that this brought on was, if you consider business functions such as risk management, such as product management, and even customer management for that matter, RPA was not that effective because these business functions were actually really dynamic and they involved a lot of decision making as well. So over the last 24 months or so, all of these various technologies are now coming together, and now we are seeing a genre of a platform called as hyper automation or intelligent automation. So what does that mean? So when you say hyper automation, it is nothing but all of these various technology tenets of artificial intelligence, analytics, process mining, all being woven into the core RPA fabric itself, while the heart of hyper automation is still business automation, still business process automation, right? So when you do this, it basically provides an organization with a very evolved, intelligent, and an integrated landscape with respect to achieving process excellence. You could also have a measurable landscape. You would know what your ROIs are. You would be able to predict, where would you be in the next 2 years, in the next 6 months, right? So all these things can be achieved through hyper automation. Talking about Gartner, so Gartner basically has ranked hyper automation as the #1 top 10 strategic technology trends of 2020. Gartner also predicts that there will be an increase of 5 to 7% minimum towards the investment and spending of various organizations towards technologies such as hyper automation. So now let's see how intelligent automation kind of fits in your organization, right? So they would probably fit in all of these business functions wherever there is scope for automation. So with the advent of hyper automation, you can probably say sky is the limit. It would enable you to automate a myriad of processes, be it starting from recruitment to payroll within your HR services, or it could even be procure to pay, order to cash, record to report, collections management within finance and accounting, or talk about customer services, which kind of is very prevalent and which is kind of relevant to today's situation, whereby most of us are working from our homes. There is bare minimum staffing in the offices, due to which addressing of customer queries and grievances on time become really, really important, and hyper automation can actually play a significant role over there. So what is presented over here is not even cannot even qualify as the tip of the iceberg, because as I said, the power of hyper automation is is multitude. I would probably now talk about a little bit how this hyper automation can be driven within F&A, since that will be more relevant to this particular webinar. So this is what we call as a heat map, right? So this heat map illustrates the various business functions within F&A, and also what processes could be chosen for automation easily, and what processes should not or could not or cannot be chosen for automation, right? So say for example, if you take something like customer management, so you can kind of choose processes like the setting up the customer itself in terms of his pricing, managing the customer data, creating and managing reports. Same goes for your invoicing process, managing your account receivable and payables, setting up the billing frequencies, developing our MIS reports, so on. Also, of course, in terms of your cash management as well. But the interesting thing is, now more and more organizations are actually choosing to automate processes such as managing customer contracts, creating pricing engines and maintaining them, product placement and product creation. So these are all processes that are fairly dynamic, that require plenty of intelligence, and that also require decision-making skills. So how is this being done? This is being done because most of these organizations in the recent past are combining the capabilities of technologies such as AI and ML, and along with the power of automation such as RPA, and then they are basically using it to forge ahead with respect to their business process automation. Let me take, and maybe I can go through a couple of case studies where intelligent automation has actually proven to be beneficial to certain business processes, right? So this is one of the case study for an Indian bank for a particular process called as honest claims. So whenever we go to an ATM, we punch in the amount that we want. Our accounts get debited, but the cash never comes out, right? Either some of us or most of us would have actually experienced this particular scenario. So what this happens, or what it does in the back end, is there is immediately a customer grievance or a customer claim that is generated, which is called as honest claim, and that is kind of then needs to be resolved, and there is a regulatory reporting also that needs to go along with that particular grievance, right? So usually this particular bank used to take about 5 to 6 hours to address such kind of grievances. At the back end, what we did was we created an unattended bot, which would then read the underlying data with respect to such a claim, reconcile that with the banking systems, and then create the evidence report for the regulatory reporting as well. Now, once we did this, the total time taken of about 5 to 6 hours was brought down to 20 minutes. This was very significant because in terms of this particular process automation, it involved both regulatory impact as well as the customer impact, which are two important factors for the functioning of any bank, right? Similarly, taking a look at something called as purchase booking. So this is with regards to a logistics service provider within India. So in terms of purchase booking, what used to happen was whenever a container used to come into the port, the information of the bills with respect to the invoices would get loaded onto the cargo portal. Now, the limitation over there was the bill would actually have a bundled set of underlying invoices, and mapping these invoices to book or mark the purchases against them in the ERP would become a challenge, right? Because you would have to sift through all the invoices, you would have to see, you'd have to map them out and things like that. We created an attended bot whereby the attended bot will then log into the cargo portal. It would then read through all these bills, map the respective invoices to the purchase orders, and it will do the purchase booking. Wherever there would be a exception, that would kind of then require human intervention to kind of resolve that particular issue. Through this, what used to take about 15 minutes for every bill now has been brought down to about 3 to 4 minutes, and this ensures timely bookings of your purchases, timely payment done by the customer. Vail was talking about reducing the overall timeline to do business, and this was one of the use cases that probably illustrates that really well, right? Now, I would like to talk about how hyper automation can actually be embedded into the DNA of organization, right? So here I talk about UiPath's end-to-end hyper automation suite. So previously, UiPath only had the build, manage, and the run capabilities with respect to the platform. Now, with the advent of the recent technology changes, they have upped their platform a couple of notches, and they have kind of also added the discover, the engage, and the measure part to their platform as well, thus creating a end-to-end 360-degree platform with respect to intelligent automation. I would not like to talk a lot about this platform in the interest of time. However, I would like to touch upon a couple of important tools since we are at a stage where the CFO's office is going to be driving a lot of these automation. So I would like to talk about something like task capture. Vail was talking about knowledge retention and employee retention, right? So this task capture enables you to just take a selfie of the task performed by a user, and it automatically prepares the process document for you, and then it will also create the skeleton robot for you to then go ahead and do the automation. Same applies for process mining as well. So in terms of process mining, while task capture dealt with one particular task, process mining actually dealt with an entire business function, which could give you or generate a complete process blueprint for that particular business function, and also suggest in terms of what tasks could be automated. This then integrates into something called as an automation hub. Now, the automation hub is a very powerful tool. You could actually build your entire process pipeline in automation hub. Employees can actually put in their own suggestions for automation. You can have assessment scores for every processes that have been put in automation hub. You can also have or predict the ROI map for the next few years or next couple of years. You can see the beneficial analysis with respect to your process automation. So this is very, very important tool from a CFO's perspective, because it kind of can also tell you what is going to be the CBA or cost benefit analysis from an automation perspective. Talking about insights, insights basically is again one of the tools present as part of the hyper automation suite. It completely aligns your RP operations with strategic business outcomes with embedded analytics. So which means that it will help you to predict the future with respect to automation, with respect to coming changes, so on and so forth. So this is a bit about UiPath's hyper automation suite. Now, where do we come in, right? So I work for KGISL. So we are one of the partners of UiPath, and we believe that we can actually drive business value through automation. We can provide you with the necessary value-added services for you to move from gear 2 to the top gear. And we offer the complete end-to-end services such as consulting on RPA and hyperautomation, implementation of automation, setting up your COE, providing managed services, etc. And if you do want to kind of deep dive into a few of the other processes of POCs and all, please do reach out to us. And with that, I would like to bring this presentation to a close, and I would like to thank everyone for making me a part of this webinar. Thank you.
With that, I would like to now invite our next speaker for the day, Mr. Bhaskar Ganpati, co-founder and product manager Numbers, to share his views with us. Welcome, Mr. Ganpati.
Thank you so much. We need an RPA for giving back the share. Anyway, so
problem, you got it in time.
Okay, can you give me the sharing right so I can?
Certainly. We're just giving it to you. Till the time you log in, let me also remind our delegates for the day that you have to post your questions. We're looking forward to all the questions from your end in the Q&A section. Please don't forget to post in your questions along with your name and your company name. We would love to know you more, and share your questions in the Q&A section. We'll take them up in the panel discussion, after the panel discussion. And we would love to hear your views and thoughts and your comments about the topic that we're discussing today in the chat section as well. We'll be running the poll shortly, so remember it's mandatory, and the quiz coming up shortly as well. With that, over to you, Mr. Ganpati.
Hey, thank you so much, guys. My name is Bhaskar. I lead the product for Numbers. I really appreciate all of you joining for the session. Continuing on from where Manikaran, Vel, and Sriram left, I'll continue on focusing on receivables and collections. That's our focus. And it's a privilege to talk to finance experts and leaders here. So the topic for my discussion is get paid faster. Hopefully this will be even more interesting in these times for the audience. So a quick start, a brief introduction about Numbers. Numbers is a financial technology company. We basically build SaaS-based enterprise software to accelerate receivables and collections. I think both Manikaran and Vel talked about cash flow and receivables. That's what we focus on. We are backed by Sequoia and K Capital. We are very fortunate to have some of the marquee Fortune 500 customers, as well as some of the fast-growing companies. We have customers across manufacturing, subscription, SaaS, and services-based, like Canon, Freshworks, and Blue Dart, to name a few. We have really learned a lot from our customers, and we have coined best practices along with them. And that's what I'm going to mostly cover today. So coming down to the impact of COVID and the downturn, I think, again, Manikaran covered it nicely. What we have heard and found is, like the Gartner research, cash flow and accounts receivable, as you would agree, is top of the mind for the CFOs as things softening. Cash is the king, as they say it, but it's even more relevant right now. And also, the existing AR process definitely needs to be reimagined to suit the new normal, right? I mean, we definitely, CFOs and finance organizations need to definitely embrace digital communication, digital strategies, digital collaboration, and most importantly, even digital payments, because it's going to be very difficult to collect cash and check right now. So moving on, we have been collecting of the reasons why customers delay payments, as you would have imagined in your organization. And it's been crazier from the time of the COVID, as you can imagine and experience, right? But really, if you look at it, you can categorize these into two categories, right? One, what you can control and what you can't control, right? For example, if somebody says, I don't have your invoice, I think it's easier to fix. And you will be surprised, even within your own organization, there is a significant amount of unpaid invoices in this bucket. And we will mostly talk about this bucket in terms of best practice and technologies you can use to accelerate and unblock the payment. And we'll also touch on some of the you can't control type of mechanisms where you can have certain strategies which can even unblock those. So we are basically going to talk about all of this and how you can make a strategy or a plan for that. So based on our domain expertise, our experience, and our customers' best practices we have coined, we have come up with, like, if you can imagine as 5 pillars or 5 aspects which will help you navigate and accelerate collections during these times and in the new normal, right? And it basically comes down to people, process, and technology, right? I mean, it's still the base. So let's dive into a little more detail. Let's start with customers, which is the most critical aspect here. And you need to start gathering data around the financial data and more importantly, the payment history, right? And this is table stakes, and you probably have this from your ERPs, right? The second, best of our customers look at customer attributes. Gathering this is very critical, like type of the customer, industry of the customer, and even custom attributes based on your business, right? Because as you know, the collection process cannot be a one size fit all. You need to cater your collection based on these attributes. For example, you can't have the same strategy for a government client and an SMB client, right? It has to be different. And the third critical data is engagement data. And this gives you the behavior of the customer, right? Like, for example, what kind of promise they are giving and what they are breaking, what kind of disputes they are raising, and is it acceptable, not acceptable? And this basically, you're probably tracking this in a Excel sheet or something, but this is very critical. And together, it forms the risk profile of the customer, which becomes the underpinning for the collection strategy we'll talk about. So the next is your team itself. And again, Manikaran talked about virtual teams. And what we also recommend, and some of our best customers do this, is to have a centralized AR team. Even if it's a small team, it needs to be centralized so that your communication and strategies are consistent and also provides a better client experience or customer experience, right? But that does not mean that the centralized AR team needs to be a bottleneck. For example, if client raises a dispute regarding billing, the system can route directly to billing without the center being the overhead. At the same time, they can still have a track of that ticket or case so that they know that that problem is getting resolved and the payment is unblocked. That's the key when you come to your internal team, right? And it's also important that the centralized team enables the collaboration across the teams. The next, we'll get into the collection strategy and the flow itself. All of you probably have a process today. What is very important, especially in the new normal, is how do you put customers at the heart? How do you engage with your customer, whether you do it automatically or manually? To begin with, you need to figure out whom you are approaching, right? And again, one size doesn't fit all. So you need to segment your customer based on risk, based on different attributes we talked about, so that you can personalize the follow-ups and the timing of that accordingly. And then, of course, we talk about when, what, and the how. I'll talk about that. And it's also important that you automate this process in order to maximize the customer reach. Within our customer base, on an average, we reach out to 50 to 60% of our customers automatically, which itself will ensure that either there is some sort of a reaction and payment gets done. And you cannot stop merely at dunning itself. You need to make sure that when a customer responds to your dunning or doesn't respond, you need to have the appropriate strategy to track and resolve that. Now, when a customer responds, it's usually a query, a dispute, or another follow-up, right? Now, how do you engage with the customer, right? And again, most of the companies start engaging with the customer when the payment is due, on the due date, right? We have worked with our customers, and our best practice says that that is too late. If there is an issue with your invoice, if there is a problem, you've lost 30 valuable days to get your money, right? The best recommended approach is to start on day 3 when the invoice is delivered, not to ask for payment, but just to say that, hey, did you get my invoice? So that you provoke a reaction to see if there is an issue, and you have 30 days to resolve that. So that's very key. The second is what you communicate, right? You need to have custom templates, whether you do it in an Excel kind of a library or a system. You need to have templates for different situations and different segments of customers so that it looks personalized, right? And of course, depending on the customer type, if it's a corporate, of course, you have to do email. But if it's an SMB or a distributor, you can do SMS or WhatsApp. And also, it's very important that you have rules in your system to exclude certain sensitive customers or certain invoices and other business rules which may be relevant. Now, once the customer has been engaged using the strategy we talked about, there will be a response. I mean, there is, again, it will evolve. One of best of our customers have started receiving 30-40% of response, right? And it will evolve as you personalize and as you improve your strategy. But as soon as a customer responds, like a support system, it's very, very critical that you either have a fresh desk or you have a system which automatically alerts the collection team that such and such customer has replied, and also automatically create a case and allow the centralized team to actually figure out what is the problem and raise an issue like a dispute, or set a reminder if it is a promise to pay. And also there is a track and have a collaboration with your sales once they respond, talking to the customer if it's a price issue or a rate issue, and then work as a team remotely to collaborate and resolve the issue, right? That is key. The next is no response. And when you start, the customers will always, the bucket of no response will be higher than the response, but slowly it will improve. For the no response, what we have found with our customers is as simple as an email bounce can be the reason why there is no response, right? The accounts payable person on the other side may have moved on, and in this situation, things change around. So it's very important that you have a system which automatically triggers that bounce, and you trigger a process to update the contact. And the next is having an automated escalation once you've done sufficient retries to make sure that your risky customers gets a priority queue for your collector to follow up through phone, and ensure that you offer different payment plan, right? I mean, usually if the reason is I have a cash flow issue, it's a COVID situation, you should come up with strategies such as offer a payment plan. Tell them that, look, you have this much outstanding, please pay us as in 3 installments, because we are also going through the same thing, right? So if you offer a payment plan, definitely they will be able to unblock your payment. There are other situations like you can waive off certain disputes. For other things, you can give an early discount if you want to accelerate the collection, right? The next most important thing is enabling digital payment. So in the new normal, you're not going to be able to have collecting the checks going physically. So it's very important that you provide a customer portal and you provide a payment gateway or payment mechanism for your customers. And given it's a B2B situation, you should allow the customers to select multiple invoices for the payment and allow different payment mechanism. And one side benefit of digital payment is also your payment advice becomes automatic or digitized, which means reconciliation is faster. So the final pillar of our best practice is measurement. I think Sriram talked about this. Measurement comes down to insights, right? And if you don't measure, you're not going to improve. So this is a way to iterate your strategy. So we look at three things. One is collection review, one is collector performance, and one is collection insight. So review is all about where is my money stuck, whether it is stuck in a dispute, whether it's stuck in a commitment or something else, for how long is it stuck and who's responsible for it. And what can I do? Maybe I pick up the phone, email, do a waive off and release the payment, right? So it's very important that you have these insights and understand where your money is stuck and keep improving on it. The next is collector performance report. Here, the three key things are effectiveness, is your collectors are able to meet the target we set based on their collection? Are they able to close the cases or tickets which are assigned or raised by them? And what is the resolution time for the dispute? That is very important in terms of routing and resolving it. And the final is, of course, the client's, what is the effort they are putting, right? That is very, very critical. The final is some of the advanced insights you get, and this is more of a reflection, right? You don't do this weekly.
Excuse me, Bhaskar, just wanted to inform you, since you wanted to know, 2 minutes left, right?
Sure. Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so what is very critical is when you look at collection review and collector performance, you need to do that every week, right? But something like this, you need to basically have a model in place, and probably you can do it monthly or quarterly, but you need to start reflecting on your risky customers and devise a strategy where this guy has moved from being red to yellow. So what do I do? Maybe I will relax on the credit limit, right? And this is also an opportunity to look at revisions of your credit terms and control of that customer. And obviously, more precision you have around identifying the risky customers, better is your forecast and planning. And the other thing is, since you're collecting all of these data of reasons why it is getting delayed or what the customer is having a problem, it's very important that you categorize your disputes, which will actually improve, which will help improve your operational process. For example, in this case, most of the problem is because the customer says it's not as per agreement. So there's an opportunity to basically improve the agreement process so that you can unblock the payment faster. So to sum it up, given in the interest of time, there are 4 pillars is what we recommend. And starting with customer, it is very important that you collect pertinent data and form a customer risk profile. We can help you with this. The second is, we recommend that in the new normal, you have a centralized team so that you have a consistent communication and a consistent collection strategy so that you can constantly measure and improve. Third is, of course, process is equal to strategy, and it comes down to how do you engage your customer based on their profile and segments? How do you track, resolve, and follow up once they respond or non-respond? And then how do you enable digital payments? This is the core of the strategy. And finally, measure. And the tools you use for that is collection review on a weekly, bi-weekly basis, collector performance to ensure that your collectors are performing on the top, and collection insights like we talked about. So with that, I'll wrap up. I'm looking forward to your questions, and you can also contact me in the email I've provided there. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Bhaskar. A very informative session, and thank you so much for summing it up with the key takeaways as well. With this, we'll move on to the next session, the most awaited knowledge sharing and interaction session, the panel discussion. The discussion is around the topic, the future of finance, new age technology or new skills. And we have very interesting names here. The session will be moderated by Mr. Vivek Sharma, Senior Domain Specialist, Dun & Bradstreet, India. Thank you, Mr. Sharma, for joining us. Our first panelist on board, Mr. Ganesh K, Chief Financial Officer at Hetero Labs Limited. Thank you, Mr. Ganesh, for joining us. Following him is Mr. Swayam Saurabh, Chief Finance Officer at Hindustan Zinc. Thank you, Mr. Saurabh, for joining us. Following him is Mr. Jayesh. Following him is Mr. Jayesh Sangrajka, EVP and Deputy Chief Financial Officer at Infosys. Thank you, Mr. Jayesh, for joining us. Next on the panel is Ms. Sumita Verma, Regional Sales Director at SAP Concur. Thank you, Ms. Verma, for joining us. Next on the panel is Mr. Samir Madan, Director Finance at Agilent Technologies India Private Limited. Thank you, Mr. Madan, for joining us. Let us begin the panel discussion. Over to you, Mr. Sharma.
Thank you, Nehal. Good afternoon, everyone. Since we have run short of time, I will start the panel discussion because there are some interesting questions lined up, which I'm sure many participants who will be getting benefit from. So, in order to start the discussion, I will be my first question to Mr. Jayesh to get his views. So, sir, for you, I just like to know from you how popular has virtual finance management become in recent years? And is it really possible to have virtual real-time visibility into the state of business with access to all relevant information? If you could share your thoughts, sir.
Hi, Vivek. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, sir, I can hear you.
Yeah. Thanks, Vivek, and thanks everybody for joining the session. Let me address the second part of the question first, which is, is there a real-time visibility, right? As most of us know, even the best of the companies take 8 to 10 days to close books and get the same auditors. And therefore, very often, many of us believe that real-time finance is far from reality. But in my mind, it's indeed possible to have real-time finance or real-time visibility in various aspects of business and almost every area where it impacts business directly or indirectly or significantly. If you look at online companies, right, today, most of them have real-time views of their sales, inventories, customer footfall on their websites, conversion of the customers, etc. And if you look at offline industries, many of them many of those sectors, depending on the adoption of technology of the sector, right? So again, in my view, real-time isn't built overnight. So these companies who have real-time view today have invested it, worked shoulder to shoulder. The finance teams have worked shoulder to shoulder with the IT teams. It begins with the creation of strong foundation of system-based processes. If you have strong systems and strong processes, you can have a lot of insights, right? It's at the end of the day, it's garbage in, garbage out, right? Once the transaction processing systems are in place, and you have captured all the data, you can really bring insights into it. There is no insights without a structure, without all the data which is captured. So therefore, having the right systems and right processes are very, very important for any insights or any real-time information that you build. Coming to your main question on how popular virtual finance has become, I think it has become very popular mainly because there is no choice. It's necessity today, right? Necessity for survival. The rising of volumes, the rising of complexities, expectation for stakeholders, whether you call business leaders or the CEO, in terms of faster, accurate, and more reliable information to drive the business. has made, has forced many of the finance folks to come to a virtual solutions and look for the best of the technology. But if I think more about it, right, it's not only necessary; it is a significant competitive advantage to have a real-time finance systems. It's going to, if it is going to take 2 to 3 days, even after books which are closed, and draw 2 to 3 days to get out reports which are segment-wise, vertical-wise, uh, you know, inventory-wise, or the product line that you have. Uh, by then, half the month is gone, and it's going to be of no use for the business leaders, very often. So if you are going to be running the business with your leaders, if you are going to be running the business with the CEO, be a co-pilot, I think it is going to be very important for you to design and implement a real-time system that helps the business leaders to maneuver the challenge and remain competitive in today's world.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, sir, for that. Thank you for your views. Let me now quickly move to Mr. Ganesh and put him the same question specifically to get his views on, how popular has virtual finance become in recent years.
Ganesh, I think you're mute.
See, I'll just take a back step and try and classify or segment the finance function itself. Like normally, like I put it in 3 buckets. There are certain companies which want finance to be just a bookkeeper. I call them more a transaction processing organizations. No major expectations from the management except if you could actually do a proper book closure and meet some of the reporting requirements. Level 2 finance functions actually get into a bit more on the MIS analytics. Generally, these are all listed companies where they actually get into reporting within a particular time and compliances. And to me, the third level companies are where finance is treated as a strategic partner or a business partner, where there should be a lot more insight into the business, and finance equally works along with the CEO to actually run the business. So if I actually look at these 3 buckets, for a virtual finance level 1 companies, it's a walkthrough. I don't think there is any significant challenges. It's technically just a bookkeeping. In my personal opinion, the concept of accounting will vanish in another 5 years. I think the machine will actually start doing the accounting part. Up to accounting and reporting, I don't think there needs to be any manual intervention by 2025. This is my personal view. The second part is this is the virtual is on the cards, and where I actually see a lot of challenges could be on the level 3 companies where you wanted the finance to work like a strategic partner and get into all the business decisions. I think this is, I would say, finance need to really catch up with the business environment, understanding the complexities, understanding the risk factors. I don't know how many of the finance functions are really ready to take that role. And here, I don't think in India we have actually gone in depth in terms of virtual finance for a level 3 company. Level 1 and level 2, definitely virtual finance is on the cards, and it will happen very rapidly. So the question, like whether it is critical today, like there are with SAP, we could actually like get a lot more data. I won't call it a real time, but actually in pharmaceutical industry, like it's not that we want information minute to minute, even on a daily basis. If you get it, which is well and good. I think today I don't see any real-time data need at this point of time. So this is something maybe for certain other industries it could differ, but from a pharmaceutical perspective, other than the routine approvals or getting the workflow solutions, I don't see any much impact in terms of real-time solution at this point.
Technologies such as data analytics, automation, IoT, etc., has transformed the finance function and enhanced decision making.
Vivek, this question is.
Hello.
This question is
for Mr. Swam.
okay. Every fact that wisdom comes from precedents, and we keep repeating that we are living in unprecedented times. So basically, we are short of wisdom. So looking forward to this session. Share so we can also learn from all of you. Now, technology like data analytics, automation, IoT, they have done their own transforming finance function. And clearly, much more is coming, especially for Indian corporates. If I look at, for example, analytics, a number of us in India are at a very basic level of analytics. Something which support, focusing on accurate and just sufficient decision making. I think with time, especially COVID coming in, will go into enhanced analytics, where you have a feedback loop where you can learn from previous mistakes and build it in your whole analytics path where you can take better decisions. And I think after that, what we have is what some of the panelists here, which is predictive. How do you forecast accurately? How do you predict, let's say, a customer going into a credit default? But I think that's a journey which has started well. I personally think COVID has just expedited this whole thing. Now, on automation, robotic or automation primarily is robotic process automation, and there has been a detailed. Essentially, it saves cost, improves accuracy. For example, examples were mentioned in the presentation, around financial services. Your repetitive tasks, low impact tasks, if they can be automized, I mean, you are looking at significant productivity gains, far lesser inefficiencies. There are a number of business sub processes where they can be deployed. Again, I think it is still gaining momentum. Some organizations are ahead of others, but imperatives are very clear. IoT, artificial intelligence, I don't think is very popular yet, at least in the larger corporate segment in India, but it's again gaining momentum. So, simple things like enhanced intelligence, using a customer and, or a supplier's customer buying or supplier selling pattern to flag a potential default. Today, we don't have that capability to the extent what tools allow us to or data allow. But for example, in our case, if I can, use a case from my industry, a combination of machine learning today gives Vedanta ability to applicate, in a given set of ore, which is an input for the metal we make, 1,500 possible, variables, most optimum variable, which will give me, let's say, best recovery. And this was possible simply because you have historical data of 20 years, and in a machine learning algorithm, you basically process it, and you can actually see value. Same thing can be applied on cost, and something which I think a lot of corporates are starting to look at very seriously. But if I go beyond your question, I also have asked myself why the speed of adoption is not as fast as it should be. And I personally think that a number of times the value which some of these investment would bring in an organization is not so clear. That story is not clearly told or understood. That translates into hesitation in investment. But the other big reason which I see, again, looking at the corporates I have worked with, including my current organization, it's also about making an effective change management plan. So it's not only about these tools and technologies which are going to be available for us to use, but I think success in the end would be defined by how effectively we manage this change and take the organization through. As I said in the beginning, there is far better understanding. There is far better appreciation now on what these tools and technologies could possibly do. They have also matured. They have started to become more efficient. And the biggest boon I see personally is this COVID. At least there is one thing positive about COVID, where need for adoption, need for becoming more efficient is just going to be 3x of what it would have been prior to COVID. So I think we have done taken a large step of journey already. there is much more to do, but I think Indian corporates are on the right path.
Okay. Thank you for that. Before I come to Ms. Sumedha, I will request on the same question Mr. Jayesh to add his views. And just one more request to all panel speakers that please, sir and madam, please be in mute when others are speaking. Mr. Jayesh, your views quickly on this. How have technologies such as data analytics, automation, IoT have transformed the finance function?
Sure, Vivek. Just to add to Swayam, he's covered pretty much most of the things. But in my mind, these are the true technology enablers, and they've helped complete transformation of many of the finance functions, right? If you just look at data analytics by itself, right, the applicability of it is so widespread, right? It can be from a basic operational analytics where you're running claims analytics or you're running AP analytics to find out real-time visibility to improve your operational metrics, to a real-time revenue dashboard, and deploying predictive analytics on top of that, which can help you find out revenue visibility as well as credit default, as Swayam was saying, or even the forensic analytics, which can go all the way to tell you before a transaction goes through that this transaction looks a fraudulent, and helps you prevent a fraud from happening, whether it is claim, whether it is AP, or whether it is any other transaction that a company is going through. And on the other side, if you look at automation again, can be basic automation of tasks that we are doing, which again could be claims, AP, the billing, which some of these are just very simple tasks. Some of them can be very complex. For instance, the invoicing, and especially invoicing in entities like ours, which operates in 70, 80 odd countries. There are different tax regulations. Something is taxed on the basis of where the client is based. Something is taxed on the basis of where the effort is spent, or combination of the two. And all of that can be automated, right? It on one side reduces your effort, on the other side it ensures near confidence, very high confidence in terms of compliance, right? On the other one, people have deployed advanced automation, which is deploying OCR, optical character recognition, to read documents, to find out very onerous clauses of those documents, put them in the contract tracker and track them very regularly. Deploy OCR again, combined with AI and learning to read invoices, to read claims, and find out frauds and so on. I think wide variety of application of these technologies. It's only your imagination which can put constraints on what transformation you can bring in.
Okay. Thank you for that. That was really insightful. Now I'll quickly move to Sumedha and like to get her views on a similar question: how finance leader can use data analytics, data insight with the help of technology to manage their costs and maybe control them before they occur.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Vivek, for having me here, and good evening to all the panelists and all the attendees. So while the answer to this question has already been sort of given by Swayam and Jayesh, so I'm going to pretty much sum up their answers. And so as I mean, what I feel is that finance function today is expected to leverage latest technology and then use data and analytics to drive strategy, besides ensuring the normal financial functions that they are aligned in an organization. So I mean, so finance functions today utilize data insights which are delivered by integrating all the siloed solutions across the entire spectrum of employee initiated spend. And what is important is just not integrating these siloed solutions, but also having common measures of performance, and how whatever output you're going to get out of the data, how you're going to measure it. Like, for example, we went to a customer. I mean, they had different departments for using different systems, and the way in which they were measuring their performance was also very different, and they were explaining their results very, very differently. So obviously, this hyper-connected structured data can provide insights to predict the cash flows, so that real-time decisions can be taken based on holding or releasing cash, accepting or deferring costs. based on whatever the current financial position is and whatever the current priorities are, and also I mean keeping in mind the long-term vision and strategy for the organization.
Okay.
Jayesh mentioned he was, talking about the forensic side of it. These can also help avoid potential future costs and, risks which are resulting from being non-compliant to regulatory requirements in the form of, fines or damage to brand reputation or possibly market cap reduction. So I would just like to, sum it up by saying that, all of these data insights are important, but the CFOs utilizing their technical skills and judgment on top of it can definitely help an organization manage the cost. But what is something which was not covered was that it is also important for CFOs to rethink of what type of talents need to be attracted into the finance function. So could be like people from data analysis background. And in addition, existing teams also need to be reskilled and re-engaged to be able to utilize all of the technology which is available today. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Now let me bring Mr. Samir in and get his views on what kind of progress have organizations made in terms of strategies for financial spend discipline.
So thank you for having me. Good evening to everybody. I think the sheer amount of data which a CFO has access to gives us much earlier insights. The ability for a CFO to be at 38,000 feet and come down to 0 feet and go back to 38,000 feet in a jiffy is something which modern day ERPs, all your reporting platforms have given, and give us those early warning signals. The ability to interpret the numbers, to catch a trend, and a trend is your friend. I think that's where the real meat of the equation is. Numbers are a given, the ERPs will take care of it. But as a CFO, I need to catch the trend. I mean, how can I predict, is my gross margin going up or down? Which I can easily get from my quotes, the first quote, the second quote. The predictive modeling is so important and it's so easy if you look at it. I can predict the future reasonably well. However, I need to be equipped, I need to have the right team, and more importantly, need to have the right tools. I think finance and IT have become two sides of the same coin. I don't know, 10 years from now, one will take over the other. I hope it's us finance guys who take over from IT folks. It's quite easy to my knowledge, as long as you have the systems and the right people to catch the trend. I mean, adjust your cost. I mean, COVID has taught us, what should we expect in the next 2 weeks, if not beyond.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you for that. Quickly moving to Mr. Ganesh, I'd like to get his views on what are the new ways, strategies for cost optimization and working capital management.
Being in pharma, maybe I just wanted to share very industry-specific challenges. Because of COVID, there was a supply chain disruption starting from January. While I don't know the rest of the industry, as far as pharma is concerned, the raw materials were coming from China. We actually started tracking COVID impact starting from the end of January. That's one piece of information. Second piece of information, there is a disruption. Even if you look at Indian market, the acute segment has gone down, chronic is still stable. So we really don't know what sort of demand that's going to happen in the next couple of months. Most likely, pharma will have a little bit of a downtrend in Q1 of 21. This is my expectation. The third piece of information, which is very, very interesting, is because of COVID, a few pharma companies actually got an opportunity to supply certain products. Like, for example, we had a couple of products which had a sort of a treatment for critical care. In COVID, we were able to actually supply certain medicines. This completely distorted your entire production plan. So today, the way I look at it, COVID is just the start of it. It's going to be very difficult to predict your supply demand and the production. I think these two are going to be very, very challenging in at least 6 months. That's what my expectation is. under this scenario, you're going to have certain upside opportunities like reducing for something for COVID, and that could also be a downside where the market itself is right. And we also don't know what is the secondary sale impact which is happening in USA. The lockdown continues between May and June, and we know what is the primary sale. We actually don't know what the secondary sale. The last point is more on the foreign exchange swing which happened in the month of March, where almost every emerging currency actually lost 20 to 30%. When a company is actually de-risked with a global operation, you actually end up with significant challenge of managing currencies, which was unprecedented. Some currencies even lost 30% in the span. Now, if I look at all this, my working capital is going to be a challenge. Predicting your profitability, like what's the gross margin you are going to get on a particular product, it's going to be another significant issue. Because the cash conversion cycle in pharmaceutical is anywhere between 6 to 8 months. The moment you get an order, it actually takes almost 7-8 months to actually like fulfill the order requirement. So during this 6 to 8 months time frame, anything can go wrong. And how do we actually like predict or do a course correction as and when a particular event? I mean, this is where like this industry is grappling with a solution, which is also a bit of a challenge. And we do expect a certain amount of artificial intelligence or somewhere where we could actually make certain predictive analytics, how things would turn out if a secondary sale doesn't happen, or if one of the key risk factors is to add on. Now, the government is going to be a big player in the pharmaceutical. They are going to actually buy more products and because they are coming up with a lot of tenders, things like that. Now, how do we actually like put all this moving parts together and predict what your profitability is, what your cash flows are going to be, what challenges you are going to have in terms of carrying over your inventory? I think this is going to be a big billion-dollar question. So today, what we are actually trying to do is take it by piece. Trying to address currency separately, we're trying to look at inventory separately. But if you really see, do we have an integrated solution to plug all this moving parts into a solution, a strategy for visualizing my next 3 to 6 months? I don't have an answer. But I will ask the rest of the panelists to.
Okay. Okay. Before I come to Mr. Swam, I would like to thank Mr. Jayesh for having joined us. I think he has some other important engagement now. So I will now move on to Mr. Swam and like to get his views on the same question that I just asked, which is, sir, your thoughts on, how are new age strategies for cost optimization and working capital management? What are those strategies, if you can share it?
I think new strategies, basically proven strategy. I think data is becoming key. Data has to start becoming meaningful and available fast. Again, this is something which has been spoken a few times in the discussion so far. Better visualization, reliable forecasting, for example, around your, we are a manufacturing industry, WIPs or your collection cycle. I think what is also becoming a focus linked to data is cost of poor decisions need to come down. This reflects agility, something all organizations need right now more than ever. It's really advanced right analytics before decision is made, analytics to understand when I repeat that decision what not to do or what did I learn from it, what did I how do I benchmark myself, right? Poor decision basis what I have understood, I was reading an article, cost of poor decision adds up to 3 to 4% in global organizations total P&L, and then on top of that you have hidden cost. I'm sure a lot of my fellow CFOs here would agree. I don't know what I don't know. And for example, cost like demurrages, inventory holding costs, wrong payments, Again, it is data driven. I think that's clearly going to be a very clear focus. Other than that, I think there's going to be also a lot of traditional cost which will get challenged and will be part of new age strategies. And somebody mentioned, real estate. Why do you need offices, traditional offices, and incur a certain percentage of cost? Because that's how traditionally we are used to be in office. That costs like those would actually shift more towards, be preparing ourselves to continue to work remotely, and investing more towards making communication, for example, robust and secure. But other than these new age strategy, I think the focus is very clear. I think a lot of organizations are going to shift focus to fixed cost. This reflects flexibility because 3 months or 4 months back, I don't think none of us would imagine that we are going to be in this situation. And I can guarantee that none of us could think this will last this long. So, one of the way organizations can adopt, respond, recover better next time, if you have flexibility in your cost structure. So, for example, we are definitely looking at bringing our fixed cost as a percentage of total cost down to a certain level. And I'm quite sure a lot of corporates in India are looking at it. Then, of course, the whole working capital we discussed, the short-term focus clearly is on cash conversion. But a lot of structural strategies are going to be in place, again, using data, but essentially seeing how do I make my, receivables more secure? How do I get them in time? What kind of contracts do I enter? So I think a combination of these, and again, I've said this a couple of times, the data, use of data, making data meaningful, available when it is needed, accurate, the cost of decision making, cost of poor decision, all of that is going to be focused when it comes to cost optimization and working capital management.
And Vivek, if I may quickly add, just revisit the business model, because this is probably one time where we have to revisit from a paradigm shift perspective. We've never really relooked at our business models, and if they're not sustainable, tweak them, cut out costs, make it more available, get market intelligence. So again, coming back to data. So it's all data.
Okay. Yeah,
Precisely
thank you.
the point, Samir. I mean, the fact that looking at fixed cost, a structure companies like ours have operated for 50 years, it's no more valid. It doesn't hold.
Okay, thank you. Now let me quickly bring in Sumedha to get her view on something which is kind of, asked very frequently these days, and I would like her to elaborate this. So, how according to you, the CFO's role has evolved today to drive operational performance and efficiency. So if you can share your views on this question. I think you are on mute. If you can unmute, please.
Yeah. So Vivek, what I was saying was that traditionally, CFOs were responsible for safeguarding assets, doing cash flow management, understanding and managing risk, financial reporting and analysis. And while, I mean, these tasks are still central to the role, but, today CFOs are definitely taking up newer responsibilities. And that is what I heard from, all of the panelists also here today. And what I believe is, and what I see is that CFOs today are also driving transformation for ensuring, that a high state of operational resilience and efficiency is maintained in the organization, which includes, streamlining and transforming all of their financial processes and systems. And obviously, it goes beyond that. But these two things in total obviously helps to increase people and both efficiency. Like for example, utilizing machine learning to automate, routine mundane tasks, not only helps to increase people efficiency, but also helps the processes to be more optimized. And it also helps employees to be more efficient and more engaged at work. And since more than 50% of the workforce today comprises of millennials who are very, very comfortable with using technology, acceptance and change management with respect to technology adoption today is definitely not a question. And I would say it's rather an expectation, from the employer that is, I want to see these technologies, at the office where I work, and I can work from home. And on your question around the operating performance part of it, I do believe that finance executives appear to be, turning inwards to manage the factors which they have in control, such as operating performance, and SG&A costs are definitely an area of focus for cost containment and operating performance, which is very, very relevant for today. And with the help of new technologies and data analysis, CFOs today are able to have a much tighter control and also focus these costs, which also allows them to allocate resources for providing the best value for the business.
Okay, so can we say that from the traditional back office kind of role that finance used to play, it is much more integrated today into the core business function?
Absolutely, it is much more strategic. Absolutely, very, very tied to the business. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that interesting view. That was really nice. I think, unfortunately, we have run short of time and there are a lot of questions lined up, which has come from participants, which we also have to take up. So I will request Nehal to formally kind of announce this Q&A round, and we'll start the questions immediately after that.
Definitely, Mr. Sharma. So we have a lot of questions and we've shared them with you. We've actually taken a lot of questions from the participants. In case if our delegates have a few more questions, I would request all of you to please post in your questions in the Q&A section, and we shall take them up right now in the Q&A section. Once again, please do post your questions if you have still not posted your questions, and we shall take it up in the Q&A. Over to you, Mr. Sharma.
Yeah, thank you, Nehal. And now it's time for some of the questions that we have got from participants. And first question is for SAP, where the question that we have is, we talked about strategic finance. Does that mean involving finance team should include person from technical or some process specific technical training? So this is one question which has come up.
So I can take it up, and obviously, I mean, any of the panelists can expand on that. So as I mentioned earlier, since we are talking about using the finance organization to shift to digital first and being data driven. So that is definitely not going to happen overnight. So what I meant to say was that having talents or people who can also understand the data and do the analysis is important. So that is what I would say.
Okay, fine. Anybody would like to quickly add to this as well?
See, Vivek, as I said, IT and finance are two sides of the same coin, and it's very, very important that you understand the entire technical architecture, how your transactions are flowing, the interlinkages, the end-to-end view is very important. And I'm afraid sometimes I feel that in the era of specialization, which is Q2C, P2P, R2R, FP&A, that's missing. It's like a general practitioner is missing. You straight away go to a specialist doctor. So the ability for a person to look at the entire flow, right from the time when the first inquiry comes in till I get my money in the bank. You need to understand whether it's finance, IT, the roles don't make a meaning. You have to play each other's roles. So it's all over the place, and that's how it is. It's a VUCA world.
Yes, thank you. Sumedha, I will request you to help answer this one, which I feel is very interesting, where the question asked is by Mr. Sutinder Mahajanan. He is asking, how can CFO decide reduction on CapEx investments without concurrence of operating team who are in a better position to decide priorities?
I'm sorry, you will have to repeat this question again.
I will repeat it. How can CFO decide reduction on CapEx investments without the concurrence of operating team who are in better position to decide priorities?
I think this, I believe, can be better answered by my fellow panelists here. Yeah.
I can take this question. See, CFO can always reject a particular proposal if it doesn't meet the financial criteria. So operations may have we come out with a 5-star facility or something like that. If it doesn't justify financially, I think CFO can always knock it off.
Okay.
And if I can
Any
add,
addition?
if
Sorry, please go ahead, sir.
if I can add to that, one of the key priorities right now across organization is re-looking at capital allocation. Many organizations I have seen myself, CFO is actually shadow of CEO. So it's the business executive committee who takes that decision, keeping long-term interest in mind. And yeah, and then that basically becomes the organization decision. You have to balance short-term investment versus long-term.
Okay.
I'll quickly add, it's a dialogue.
Yeah,
It's a dialogue.
please.
You know,
Yeah.
operations and the CFO have to have a chat. The CFO can suggest measures which will get them what they want, but pay as you use, maybe leasing, maybe something else. Not invest one time, but over a period of time. So I think in today's world, communication with all stakeholders, and more importantly, internal. You know, I see that many CFOs are pretty good at managing the street, managing the bankers, and what have you, but not internally. So pick up the phone, get onto a WebEx meeting now, or whenever you get into office, have a water cooler conversation, and sort it out. I mean, just to speak with them more often, and just get out of your Excel mindset.
Okay. So, Sumedha, I just have got another question which typically comes up every time in such kind of a forum, which is about, how can MSMEs adopt this kind of virtual finance? Well, typically big businesses are comfortable, but what happens in case of small businesses? How will they adopt this? So your thoughts on this?
Yeah, sure. So what I believe is, and also all the fellow panelists have also mentioned about, virtual finance being the reality. I mean, obviously, Jayesh and Swayam mentioned it's no longer a choice, it is mandated. So I think with virtual finance becoming a reality, it is all the more easy because earlier you had to like invest in like on all the on-premise technologies. Now there's so many options available. There are so many cloud-based options available, and I mean definitely the ticket size of the investment can very well be structured by whichever vendor you need to sort of engage with. So I believe it's all the more easier for MSMEs.
Okay. So you are saying low cost options are now available, which makes it feasible for them, right?
Yeah, because of software as a service, it makes it a reality wherein you consume. I mean, you pay for what you consume. Yeah.
Right.
Also, it helps you with best practices. I think for MSMEs, if they go a virtual route, it really gets them the latest best practices which are available. I think that's a huge win if they were to do a virtual offshoring, if they will.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not like a cost investment. You don't have to put in huge sums of money, to start with. You can go as you want to go.
Okay.
As the history, fixed cost is history now.
Yeah, exactly. Totally.
Thank you for that, sir. That's really an interesting thought. Nehal, I think we have run short of time and, we have taken up the question. So I will request you to do the formality and, whatever other aspects that you wish to cover.
Definitely, Mr. Sharma. Thank you so much. Thank you so much to all of you. And with that, I would like to thank you, Mr. Sharma, for summarizing the entire panel discussion and duly helping us answering the relevant questions raised by our attendees. I would like to thank our esteemed panelists who shared their views and valuable inputs with us, truly gave us some really good key takeaways.